So quick aside here before we begin, caster.io is shutting down actually. Caster.io was started by Don Felker, as many of you may know. They provide Android tutorials from RX to layouts, everything that was related to Android they used to provide. But they will be shutting down as of January this month. Last day of supported operations, and actually they were the website which I was making this course for, Android MVVM with the CommandBus. So they shut down before I got the chance to upload anything. So if you're coming from there, the course will be here, which is uploaded already on this channel. Here you can see all the instructors that were involved with Caster. Here I am. You can find Joe Birch, very famous instructor. Also Anise Davis, she's famous. And so with that said, let's begin with part 2 of Android MVVM with the CommandBus. Okay, now it's important to set up Firebase to get this to work properly. So at the Firebase console website, you just create a new project, you give it a name. You can turn this setting on or off if you like. It doesn't really matter for this project. Continue. Go over to project settings, scroll down, find these icons. Choose the Android icon to add a new Android app to your Firebase project. Find the app's package name from your apps build.gradle file. Copy it over. Give your app a name. It can be the same name. If you don't know how to produce the debug signing certificate, you can press on this little question mark here. It takes you to a page where you can copy the command. Copy the command as is. Go over to your terminal and paste this as it is. Do not change anything. It doesn't matter which directory you're in. The default password for this debug key store is the word Android. Get the SHA-1 fingerprint and paste it on Firebase. Register app. Download the Google Services JSON file and drop it into your project's app directory. Next, make sure you got these imports in both the project's build.gradle and the app's build.gradle files. Sync the project, and that's it. You're all set. Let us begin. In order to go on with the UI of this application, which includes a login and a sign-up page, as you saw in the previous video, we're going to first need a splash screen. Inside, we're going to take the decision on where to send the user next, depending on whether they are logged in or not. So we open the app, start the splash activity, determine a user's authentication status with Firebase. We do this in the SplashViewModel. From there, we issue the command of either to open the entry activity or the main activity, whether they are logged in or not. For the sake of housekeeping, let's clean up some files here and place them in packages. Create a new package and call it base. We'll place the base activity and the BaseViewModel in here. Create another package and call it coin. Place the coin modules and the qualifiers in here. We will create other packages and tidy up some more later on, but for now these will do. So now we need to create a splash activity where we'll determine whether we should send them to the main activity straight away or to the entry activity where they will either sign up or log in. It's going to be a base activity which operates on a SplashViewModel. A base activity must implement a view model since we declared one in our base activity as abstract and we haven't defined it yet, so we'll do so for each activity. And we'll use Coin's own ViewModel method to lazily inject this dependency for this ViewModel. Now let's create the SplashViewModel just to get rid of the error so we can compile and run when we're done implementing the activity. Here it's complaining about how the BaseViewModel isn't open, so we'll make it open to being implemented. And that's it. Now we can proceed. Remember to use this specific import when requiring Coin's ViewModel method, because there are several other options that Android Studio might suggest, which are not the ones that we want for this ViewModel method. Inside the onCreate, we'll just call ViewModel.onScreenCreated. In this activity, we're going to want to have our own version of the handle VM command so that we can handle commands specific to this activity. Let's have this function return an expression which checks for when the command is either an open entry screen, meaning they will be directed to the login sign up screens. We'll fill this later when we've implemented them. Or an open main screen where we'll just open the main activity since they are logged in. Else we're gonna delegate the handling of the command back to the super method if it isn't applicable to our activity. So if you get a showToast method, the command will go through this method, but it won't find anything to do with it. It'll delegate back to the super method where the original showToast will work and it'll show a toast. And the open main activity method just calls the target activity.start to start that activity and finish this one. In main activity, we'll add this start method. It's just for better readability, and I find it just to be cleaner to look at. Here in the manifest, we'll change the default launcher activity to be the splash activity, and we're ready to run the app. So it crashes instantly, and Coin is complaining about how the SplashViewModel was not found in the module's definition. You'll find this often when you write the ViewModel and you have Coin set up in this way and you forget to add it to the module's definition. So we'll do that now, and we will place it in a module called ViewModels module, defined here, and it'll have all the ViewModels which we'll have in the future. We also need to add it to be included in the Coin dependency graph initialization inside the application class. But now that we have several modules, we're going to want to pass them in as a list to the modules method. Now we try to run again. It is successful. So now we're at the stage where we want to start running some operations and returning some commands based on the results of those operations. In our SplashViewModel, we're basically going to do the following. Determine a user's authentication status. If they're not logged in, we emit the open entry screen command, where they will either log in or sign up. Otherwise, we'll open the main screen because they're already logged in. The code we want to write will end up looking like this. This subscription function here will take an RX operation or function and run it. And it will dispose of the disposable that is returned from running this RX operation. For now, we're going to focus on implementing the ability to use this IO scheduler and UI scheduler fields without having to define them each time. Because this is not the last RX operation we're going to run, and we're going to need these two fields in each operation to subscribe on and observe on, as usual. As you see here, when we return from the operation, we either are authenticated or we're not, and we emit commands from either results. The way we're going to provide these two fields is through a dependencies object, which will pass to each of our view models through the BaseViewModel. So each of the view models we're going to define is going to extend the BaseViewModel, and it's going to take a base dependencies object of the type dependencies. Now we'll define this dependencies class inside the BaseViewModel, as you'll see next. It's a very simple class which has just two member variables. Both of these schedulers are of the type scheduler. We're going to tell them apart using the qualifiers we defined for them when we provided them in the coin modules file. But as far as this dependency class is concerned, they're both of the type scheduler. We specify that the BaseViewModel class now takes a dependencies object in the constructor, and we resolve these two fields inside from that dependencies object, so that now they may be used inside all other extending view models. They're just going to call this field, they'll have it freely available as long as the conditions are met that they are provided for these dependencies in Coin, which we'll do next. Now in Coin we provide these dependencies, and for the concrete value of each of them we just call get, and we give it the qualifier we defined above to tell them apart, which is the IO scheduler and which is the UI scheduler. The SplashViewModel is now ready to receive the dependencies object as an argument. We call get here as well because Coin now already knows right here that it can get these dependencies from this block that we defined. We go over to the class, pass in dependencies as an argument, then pass it over to the BaseViewModel, and now the setup is complete. Now we can use these two fields inside any view model we define. You can add a resources provider here as well if you want, to be able to get resource strings or drawables or colors right from inside your view models. We build and run this just to make sure everything's okay. Great, everything works. Let's move on to the next episode. Now, to fulfill the first part of determining a user's authentication status, we create a new use case called DetermineAuthStatus. This use case will be using the Firebase object, which we've already provided through Coin earlier. Inside, we're going to define the invoke function. We're going to assign it the result of the following expression. Check if the current user from Firebase is null. We're going to do this using the let keyword. If it isn't null, we're going to specify a new subject of the type Boolean, whether they're authenticated or not. That's all we want our use case to return. That's all we want to know, really. Upon subscribing to this subject, we're going to call the getID token with false to tell Firebase not to automatically refresh the token if the token is expired. And if the task is successful, then this means that the token is now inside the task object. We've done it. The user is logged in. So we send true to the subject's onSuccess callback. Otherwise, we'll return the error we got back from Firebase to our subject's onError callback. And finally, if the current user object from Firebase is actually null, we know for sure that the user is not authenticated at all, as opposed to being authenticated but encountering an error while getting their token. That's a different case. Now the user is null, so they've not authenticated. Of course, we now have to provide this use case through Coin as a dependency for our SplashViewModel. We'll do so in a new Coin module which will contain all our use cases. We'll provide it as a factory so that any other class could require this dependency as well if they choose. And we'll tell Coin, of course, that the Firebase auth dependency here has already been provided for earlier, so it can just call get on it to get it from the application module. And in the application class, we added to the list of modules we're initializing with Coin. Build it. Everything looks good. Moving on. Now that everything is ready for the SplashViewModel to run this use case and begin our flow, we'll start by uncommenting the call to onScreenCreated, and then we'll define it. We pass in the DetermineAuthStatus use case, which Coin will provide at runtime, and we'll tell Coin about this new dependency to SplashViewModel. DetermineAuthStatus get, because we've provided it in the use cases model in the last episode. Now the onScreenCreated function will call DetermineAuthStatus through the invoke function, subscribe to it on the IO scheduler, and observe it on the UI scheduler. Inside the subscribe method, we're going to provide the two lambdas for success and error. Our subject from the use case will be either true or false, so we'll call it authenticated for this purpose. If the user is authenticated, we emit the open main screen command. Otherwise, we're going to emit the open entry screen command. In the case of an error, we just emit a show toast command letting the user know that something went wrong. Now this is just for demonstration purposes. It's going to be more complicated in a real world application, but this is just to show off the command pattern later with testing. Now this warning that we see here is talking about how we're not using the result of the subscribe call we've just issued on the use case subject, which is true. It will produce a disposable, and we're going to need to dispose of this disposable when the ViewModel calls onCleared, or there will be a memory leak or generally just undesired behavior. So we should always dispose of these disposables. There's a tidy way of doing this, which we'll do in the next episode. To resolve the warning and apply the best practices about disposing the disposables produced from subscription operations, we're going to write a function that takes a function as an argument. It runs it and adds its result to a composite disposable object. So it's basically a list of disposables that we will clear when the ViewModel calls onCleared when the view linked to it is destroyed. In this case, the activity calls onDestroy. We start off by defining the composite disposable, and we're just going to call it subscriptions, very simple. Then we define the subscription function, which will take a function, which is just a block of code we'd like to run, in this case the DetermineAuthStatus call. It returns a disposable, and we add that disposable to the composite disposable. That's a lot of disposables in this episode. Now in the onCleared function, after super is called, we just clear the composite disposable and we're good. Now back in the ViewModel, all we have to do now is call the subscription method and supply the whole function call in braces, as this is the last parameter of the function and it's a lambda, so we can use this syntax for it. There's no need to wrap it in parentheses and then a lambda. So if you've tried to run this project so far with the addition of the SplashViewModel code, you would have encountered the following exception on launch. That Coin was unable to create an instance of the SplashViewModel in its dependency tree, so it cannot provide it for us, which is also caused by Coin not being able to provide DetermineAuthStatus UseCase, and that's also because it can't provide the Firebase auth. It's a chain of errors that started really because of this error. Firebase is not initialized. Make sure to call Firebase app.initializeApp. Now this function here is not called automatically without the addition of the Google Services library. In the apps build.gradle, we provide another ID to the apply plugin construct. ID is com.google.gms.google-services. And now in the projects build.gradle, we add the class path for this plugin. Sync the project. All good. Now let's run again and clear logcat. Okay, it runs fine, but we don't really see any output or know whether what we wrote actually works or not. The conditionals inside the SplashViewModel and the ones inside DetermineAuthStatus. I mean, what happened to them? We don't really know where we ended up. We're just not crashing anymore. So to find out, if the user is logged in, remember, we're going to send them to the main activity. So that main activity, we just need to add some line to signify that we are there. We're just going to have it say, you are logged in. Otherwise, we're going to send them to the entry activity, which we have not created yet. Let's do that now. So it's going to be a duplicate of the main activity, but it's going to have a text view that says, you need to sign up or log in. We'll define those two activities finally here in the manifest and try to run this. Okay, we see that we are dropped into the entry screen first, since we have not logged into Firebase at all, nor do we have a user. So now we know that this conditional block in the SplashViewModel actually works. But let's make sure. We're going to place some breakpoints here. And in the DetermineAuthStatus UseCase, we're also going to place a breakpoint on the two possible outcomes. Either we do have a Firebase user and all of this block runs, or we do not, and the return value is just a single with the value false. We should be dropped here on line 24. Let's run, debug and run, terminate the current running instance of the app, and we see that we are in fact dropped on that line. No current Firebase user, it's actually null. So we just come back with false. SplashViewModel receives this, calls it authenticated as you saw before, and does the conditional according to that. In this case false, it does emit command, open entry screen. That's exactly what we expected to happen.